All right, so we're diving deep into Frantz Fanon today. Listeners sent us selections from two of his works, Black Skin, White Masks, and The Wretched of the Earth.
Yeah, two really powerful pieces of writing.
They both get into how colonialism really shapes, you know, individuals and whole societies, especially when you start thinking about the idea of, like, what even is Black identity?
And Fanon's work, it's as relevant now as it was decades ago.
Totally.
He wasn't just some, academic theorizing from afar.
Right.
Being born in Martinique, being a psychiatrist and a philosopher, he brought this really personal understanding to what it meant to live under colonialism, and then, of course, the fight for decolonization.
Yeah, and his involvement in that Algerian independence movement, I mean, that really comes through.
Oh, absolutely. It shaped how he saw the psychology, the politics, the whole,
It's a system.
the system of oppression, yeah.
One thing that just jumps out at you right from the start is how Fanon tackles this concept of blackness. Like, is it even real? He says it's not some inherent thing you're born with. It's constructed, made up by white society,
Constructed, yeah.
and often used to make people feel inferior to even hate themselves.
It's amazing how Fanon really breaks down the mechanics of how this happens.
Yeah.
He uses these really vivid examples just from everyday life.
Oh, for sure.
Like that story of the priest who uses, that pidgin dialect when he talks to the black pilgrim. It highlights how casual racism gets baked into language, just the way people interact.
That's so subtle.
Right. Reinforcing a power dynamic without ever needing to actually say it out loud.
It makes you think about all the ways language is used, even today, to put certain groups down, to other them.
Absolutely. And then there's that scene, such a powerful scene, with the white woman who says sleeping with a black man would be terrifying.
Ooh, yeah.
I mean, talk about a stark illustration of those deep-seated racist stereotypes.
It's like, wow, right out in the open.
Exactly. Fanon doesn't shy away from these hard truths. And he even points out that those same types of stereotypes, we still see them all the time, even today, in the media.
Oh, totally.
Think about how black characters are portrayed in movies, TV shows, heck, even children's books sometimes.
It's crazy when you start noticing it.
Right. And it's often subtle, insidious, but it all adds up. It shapes how we perceive race and identity.
Makes you really examine what you're watching, reading, consuming, doesn't it?
Definitely makes you more aware.
Have you ever caught yourself noticing those stereotypes pop up in places you wouldn't expect?
Oh, all the time. It's always a little jarring when it happens.
Yeah, for sure. But Fanon, he goes even deeper, right? He gets into how all this external pressure leads to what he calls this desire for whitening.
Internalized racism, yeah.
Colonized people, they're bombarded with these negative messages, and they start to believe them.
It's a heavy thing to think about.
It can show up in so many ways, like wanting to fit in with the dominant culture, even to the point of, well, like Fanon puts it, to actually become white.
It's heartbreaking. And he tells some really poignant stories in the text that just bring that to life.
That one about the Martinican man who feels superior to Senegalese people because he sees himself as closer to the white man.
Yeah, that one's tough.
It's just tragic how colonialism can create these divisions even among the people who are being colonized.
That's Fanon's brilliance, though. He shows us how the system doesn't just oppress, it divides people.
And it's not always about, like, climbing some social ladder either.
No, it cuts deeper than that.
Yeah.
Like he talks about the black medical student desperately seeking recognition from his white colleagues.
Oh, right.
This guy is agonizing over not being seen as just a human being,
I really feel for him.
It shows that constant psychological toll, having to prove your worth in a system that's designed to tell you you're not worthy.
Yeah. All these stories are so powerful because they expose the insidiousness of that internalized bias.
Absolutely.
It's not always blatant discrimination, right? It's the way those messages seep in about ourselves and other people. Makes you wonder if any of us are truly immune to that.
It's definitely a question worth asking ourselves.
Yep.
And Fanon's work really pushes us to confront not just the obvious racism, but that more subtle kind of prejudice, how it plays out in individuals and whole communities.
Yeah, it's everywhere once you start to see it. And that, I think, leads us into another huge theme he tackles, the reality of colonial violence itself.
And that's where The Wretched of the Earth really hits hard.
It does.
It's just this raw, unflinching look at the violence inflicted on colonized people, both physically and psychologically.
Fanon's language in that book.
Oh, it's powerful.
He doesn't hold back at all.
There's one phrase that always stuck with me. He describes the colonized person as either man nor animal.
Oh, wow.
Powerful, right? It
Yeah.
gets at the heart of that dehumanizing aspect of colonialism, how it strips people of their dignity, reduces them to something less than human.
It's disturbing to think about.
It is. And then there's that chilling account of uh, of the village being destroyed by French soldiers and the order to destroy it. So casual. There's been too much talk about this village. Just
Yeah.
horrifying.
It sends chills down your spine reading that.
Definitely evokes some strong emotions, doesn't it? You can almost
Right.
feel the weight of history in those passages.
The suffering, the trauma, it's important to sit with that for a
Oh,
minute.
for sure.
It helps us understand the past and how it shapes the present.
Absolutely.
But then Fanon goes on to make this, well, this really thought-provoking argument, although some people find it controversial. He says that violence can actually be necessary for decolonization. And he's not talking just about physical fighting either.
Right, it's bigger than that.
He's talking about this forceful rejection of the whole system, the ideologies that the colonizer forced on people. It's a hard concept to wrap your head around, but I think there's a lot to unpack there.
There definitely is. It comes from the idea that when you have extreme oppression, when every other way to make change has been blocked,
Mm.
violence can become the only way for the colonized to regain some agency.
To reclaim their humanity almost.
Exactly. It's a last resort. It's desperate.
Yeah.
But it's a way to break free from a system that denies your very personhood.
Yeah. He gives examples of this throughout the book, right? Like the Algerian peasant who chooses to work inefficiently for his colonizer.
Yes. A form of resistance.
Quiet, but powerful, pushing back against the system, even in small ways.
And he explores this idea that concepts like honor, dignity, things we see as universally good, they lose all meaning under oppression.
Because the system itself is dishonorable, right?
Right. So the colonized, they have to create their own values, their own sense of what's right and just.
It's like they have to redefine morality in a world where the old rules don't apply anymore.
Exactly. And then there's that powerful image of forging a new national identity through shared struggle, through sacrifice.
Like that act of resistance, even when it involves violence, it can create this incredible bond.
A new national consciousness.
It makes me think about all the debates we have today about patriotism, what it means to belong, all that. But before we get too sidetracked, there's one more piece of Fanon's work we need to talk about. His critique of the negritude movement.
Ah, yes. That's where things get really interesting.
Because it's easy to misunderstand his stance on this.
Oh, totally.
He wasn't against celebrating Black culture.
Not at all.
In fact, he saw how important that was, especially when you think about how colonialism tried to erase or belittle Black people's cultural heritage.
He got that.
Bruh.
But he was cautious about what he saw as essentialism within the movement.
Essentialism, you mean like the idea that there's this one fixed, unchanging African essence that defines what it means to be Black,
Exactly. He saw that as potentially limiting, like it could put people in a box.
instead of liberating them.
Right. Fanon felt that this romanticized, essentialist view of Black identity could actually get in the way of real progress.
So instead of looking forward, you get stuck looking back to some idealized past.
Yeah, kind of. It becomes less about the struggles happening now and more about this vision of Africa that might not even reflect reality.
So it's almost a distraction from the real work of dismantling colonial structures, of building a more just future.
Exactly. He was advocating for a more dynamic, fluid understanding of Black identity.
One that recognizes that Black people are not a monolith. There's so much diversity.
Absolutely. So much complexity to those experiences all across the globe.
So instead of trying to define Blackness based on some fixed idea,
Fanon wanted to see a national culture that emerged from the actual lived realities of the people.
not just from some nostalgic idea of the past.
Right. A culture that reflected the struggles, the dreams, the wide range of experiences of Black people.
That's powerful. It makes me think about how we're still grappling with all these questions about cultural identity today. Like, Fanon was way ahead of his time.
Oh, absolutely. And his work still has so much to offer us as we try to navigate these complex issues.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground already, and it's a lot to take in.
It is.
So before we move on, let's take a moment to just reflect. What are some of your key takeaways from what we've talked about so far? What stuck with you?
For me, it's how Fanon always centers the actual lived experience of the colonized person.
He doesn't just talk about it in theory?
No, he brings it to life. Those personal stories, the vivid descriptions, the powerful imagery, He forces us to confront the real human cost of colonialism.
Yeah, the suffering, the trauma inflicted on generations. And it's not just about the physical violence either.
Right, exactly. It's
Yeah.
the psychological violence, the way colonialism warps people's sense of self, their place in the world.
It's about how colonialism isn't just about conquering land, it's about conquering minds and hearts.
Imposing a whole worldview that devalues, dehumanizes entire groups of people.
And that's why his work is still so relevant today.
Absolutely.
We may not be living under direct colonial rule in most parts of the world anymore,
True.
but we still live in a world shaped by its legacy,
A world where those power dynamics haven't gone away.
where certain groups are still marginalized and oppressed. And Fanon's work, it helps us understand those dynamics and it gives us tools to challenge them. But we'll dig into that more in the next part of our deep dive. For now, we want to leave you with this. How do Fanon's ideas about the construction of Black identity and the realities of colonial violence resonate with your own experiences?
What connections are you making between his work and the challenges we're facing in the world today? It's fascinating how Fanon's insights, they still feel so relevant even today. We've been talking about the ways colonialism inflicts this violence, not just physical, but psychological, cultural, all of that. And it brings us back to his view on the role of violence in decolonization, which is complex.
Right, it's controversial for sure.
For sure, it's not a simple good versus bad situation,
Yeah.
as Fanon talks about it. It's more like violence is already there, woven into the fabric of colonialism. So then the question becomes, can it also be a part of dismantling that same system?
Ooh, that's a good way to put it. And we have to remember, Fanon was writing from his experience in the Algerian struggle for independence.
Exactly.
He saw firsthand how colonial powers used violence to hold on to their control.
Right.
So he argues that tragically, sometimes violence becomes the only way for the oppressed to actually break free.
Yeah. It's a tough truth.
It is. But he's not saying just like go out and be violent, right?
Right.
Like that's not his message.
Fanon emphasizes this is a last resort, when every peaceful option, every other avenue has been completely shut down. And he's very clear that violence, if it is used, it has to be strategic.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Aimed at the oppressive structures, not at individuals.
So dismantling the system itself, not about revenge.
Yes, exactly. And he also talks about this idea of psychological violence as a part of the whole decolonization process. It's this forceful rejection of the values, even the whole worldview that the colonizer has imposed.
So not just physically fighting back, but like mentally breaking free from that colonial mindset.
You got it. Reclaiming your own culture, your values, your identity,
Yeah.
even if it means totally upending the established order.
This is making me think about how much we talk about nonviolent resistance these days. Would Fanon see that as part of this like psychological decolonization you're talking about?
That's a really interesting connection. And I think he absolutely would.
Yeah.
Remember, he gave the example of the Algerian peasant choosing to work inefficiently for his colonizer.
Right.
That's nonviolent, directly challenging the economic system of colonialism.
Even in those small actions, you can resist the power structure. But then there's that bigger idea he gets into about forging a whole new national identity, and it comes through this shared struggle.
Yeah, it's powerful. He suggests that collective resistance, even when it involves violence, it can create this incredible sense of unity, of purpose, like forging a new national consciousness from the fires of the struggle.
Wow. Makes me think about, like, all the debates we see today about patriotism, national identity, what it even means to belong to a place. It's complicated. But before we go too far down that road, there's another key aspect of Fanon's work we should get to, his critique of the negritude movement.
Yes, and this is where it gets really nuanced.
Okay.
It's so easy to misunderstand what Fanon's saying here. We've got to remember, he wasn't opposed to celebrating Black culture. He actually saw the value in it.
Especially, like you were saying, when colonialism tried to wipe out that heritage.
Right, exactly. But he was wary of essentialism.
Okay, remind me. What does that mean again?
It's the idea that there's this one fixed, unchanging African essence that defines all Black people,
Ah, okay.
like a single story that fits everybody. And he saw that as a potential trap, a way of limiting Black identity instead of liberating it.
Interesting. So for Fanon, true liberation meant embracing all that diversity and complexity of Black experiences all over the world.
You got it. Not trying to force everyone into the same box.
So instead of looking back to some, like, idealized African past,
He was urging people to focus on the present the future.
Hmm.
What are the struggles happening now?
Because romanticizing the past could actually distract from the need to dismantle those colonial structures that still exist today.
It's about building a future where Black identity is defined by Black people themselves, not by some outside force or idealized notion.
It's about who gets to tell the story, right?
Exactly. It's about agency, self-determination, that freedom to shape your own identity.
Mm.
And that's where Fanon's vision for national culture comes in.
He wasn't talking about some nostalgic return to the past.
No,
It was this dynamic, evolving culture, something rooted in the lived realities of the people,
living, breathing thing.
a culture that reflects the struggles, the hopes, the huge range of experiences that make up Black life.
Yes, it's a powerful vision. And it makes you think about all the ways we see cultural identity being debated and redefined today. It's like Fanon was decades ahead of everyone.
He really was. And his work continues to offer these really valuable insights for how we think about these complex issues. But I'm curious, how do we apply his ideas in a world that's, supposedly moved beyond traditional colonialism?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Hmm.
And I think the answer lies in recognizing that while, yeah, overt colonialism might be mostly in the past, those underlying structures, the mentalities, they're still here.
So we're talking about seeing those echoes of colonialism in the way power works in the world today.
Exactly. Think about things like economic inequality, racial injustice, cultural appropriation, the struggles that marginalized communities are still facing all over the world. Fanon's work can help us understand all of that.
It's like he gives us a new lens to look through, a way of seeing those subtle ways that power operates and how it impacts our lives.
Absolutely. That's why Fanon remains so relevant. He's not just asking us to observe these power dynamics. He's saying, challenge them, take action, work towards a more just and equitable world.
It's a call to action for sure. A reminder that the fight for liberation is far from over, and we all have a role to play in it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Hmm.
And I think that's a good place to pause, let our listeners process everything we've talked about.
It's been a lot.
We've gone through some really complex, challenging ideas, and I'm sure there are a lot of thoughts swirling around out there.
So we'll leave you with this question. As you think about Fanon's ideas, what stands out to you as the most relevant to your own life, your own experiences?
What connections are you making between his work and the world we're living in today?
Going through Fanon's work, it really struck me how he doesn't let us off the hook. It's not just about pointing fingers at the bad guys over there.
Yeah, he makes us look in the mirror a bit.
Exactly. It'd be easy to just condemn obvious racism and prejudice, but Fanon pushes us to go deeper.
See how these systems get perpetuated in these, sneaky ways.
And how we might even be part of the problem without realizing it.
That's a tough pill to swallow sometimes.
It really is. It makes you examine your own beliefs, your behaviors. Am I part of this system I'm criticizing?
It's humbling, for sure. But that's the power of Fanon's work. It's not about shaming people.
Right.
It's about taking responsibility, recognizing how we might be benefiting from these systems of inequality, even if we don't mean to, and then doing something to change it.
Okay, so what does that doing something actually look like? How do we go from awareness to action to making a real difference?
Well, Fanon was a huge believer in education.
Knowledge is power, right?
He thought it was essential for liberation, for transforming societies. So educating ourselves about the histories of colonialism, about what marginalized communities are still going through today, that's where it starts.
Understanding the roots of the problem, not just the symptoms.
Exactly. And once we have that understanding, we can start challenging those systems in our own lives, everyday things.
So, give me an example.
It could be something small, like calling out a racist joke or a stereotype, speaking up when you hear that kind of language. Or it could be supporting organizations fighting for social justice.
So being mindful of how your actions affect others.
Yeah, and making choices that align with your values. And then there's the bigger picture, advocating for policies that actually create more equity. Fanon believed true liberation needed systemic change, not just individual acts of kindness.
So getting involved in politics, using your voice to demand a better world.
All of that, it all matters.
Sounds like there are so many ways to contribute, some big, some small, but it starts with looking inward first.
It does, with recognizing where we fit into these systems. And Fanon gives us the tools to do that, to see things from a different perspective.
It can be challenging to read his work, even uncomfortable sometimes, but there's this message of hope running through it all.
Oh, absolutely. He believed a more just world was possible, but it would take everyone working together. recognizing our shared humanity, our connection to each other.
Paring down those walls that divide us. Powerful stuff. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the world of Frantz Fanon. We hope you found it insightful, maybe even a little bit challenging. But ultimately, we hope it's inspired you to keep thinking, keep learning, keep questioning.
Keep pushing for a better world. Thanks for joining us.